Since the last demo we showed, we had a lot of post-rendering effects and kind of polish to the game. A couple of examples are motion blur, for example. During the fast-paced tunnel chase, or when the player moves the camera really fast, you see the motion blur, and it's a really cool next-gen feature that Starbreeze has added. Another thing you might notice too is they went through all the levels and kind of added this color palette, color filter to all the levels that really gives it that New York gritty sense that we were kind of really looking to do. The game's called The Darkness. We really wanted to make it dark and gritty, and Starbreeze really did a great job of capturing that, especially with all their technology in-house. From the weapons point of view, you kind of see it at first and you're like, oh, standard first-person shooter. But what really takes the darkness over the top is the darkness power, which comes straight from the comic. We try to be as true as we can. You could summon Darklings, so you kind of have these little minions and your own little army at your own disposal, so they act as your allies. You have your demon arm, which is this large tentacle that you kind of impale objects. You lift up cars and shipping containers and throw them around. So it really adds to the whole usual first-person shooter stuff. The other thing that we found that was really interesting was the whole shooting out the lights gameplay. It's up to the player. It's to their advantage to actually run into a room, see a bunch of enemies, to look at the lights and okay, I need to shoot at this light, I need to shoot at that light, and it's their advantage to actually shoot those lights out, summon Darklings, and actually fight in the darkness. So I think it really adds a new gameplay feature that we really haven't seen yet in a lot of games. Yeah, there's totally places in the game where you want that rapid action gunfire, but there are areas where you want the player to think. I'm like, okay, I have these powers at my disposal. How am I going to get around this obstacle? Whether it's lifting up a large object and moving out of the way, or using it to a puzzle element, or using the creeping dark, which is basically sending out one of those demon heads out, and kind of your stealth adventure aspect of the game, and finding a way around this obstacle. So we really encourage the player to play around with these darkness powers and find different solutions to these puzzles. While the story itself progresses pretty linear, you get mission updates from different characters in the world, like Butcher and Jenny, who you recognize from the comic book. But it's really up to the player to, if they want to follow the critical path and kind of keep going towards the story and getting point A, point B, point C, and so on and so forth. But they can also venture off. 3/5 of the game are based in New York. So they have the subway system, which they could actually, get from different places. So they could actually visit areas that they don't necessarily need to yet, and find side missions, talk to different characters, find different areas that are, unlockable and things like that. So it's real to the player to go at his own pace. There will be boss fights here and there, and so it's really, it's a matter of the user's preference.
I wouldn't hang out around here if I was you, pal. There is something that just ain't right about this place.
The other 2/5 of the game are what we call the other world, which we actually really haven't shown much of yet, but we hope to in the future. Actually, for fans of the comic, if they look at certain parts of Paul Jenkins' Resurrection series from the comic, they might see some glimpses of what we're doing. What we really wanted to do was kind of take the story in two different paths. You have that one path where you're fighting your Uncle Paulie, trying to gain control of the mafia. So it's kind of real world, set in New York, fighting cops and mobsters. But the other side, is this really surreal battling with this ancient demonic entity called the Darkness, which is trying to take over. And it's really surreal, and you fight, not your normal arrays of enemies that you find in New York. So we really kind of want to go from the surreal and the realism and go to two different extremes totally. That's one thing we wanted to capture from the comic was, the Darkness is kind of like its own entity speaking to Jackie. The Darklings have their own personality, Jackie's alter ego. They're the funny aspect of the game. So we really wanted to capture that exactly how it was in the comic. We enlisted Mike Patton, who used to be the lead singer for Faith No More, and more current stuff like Peeping Tom and things like that, as the voice of the Darkness. And for fans of him and whatnot should know that none of this stuff is actually, there's no poster work, it's all him. So he's got a great voice for that sort of thing. And the Darkness will continue to talk to Jackie throughout the game. It's almost like its own person, even though you don't necessarily see him visually, he's always whispering in your ear. For example, also the Darklings also have, each one we want to give them their own personality. You have a Gunner Darkling who's kind of all camouflaged out with the Born to Kill helmet and cigar, so he has his own voice. You also have a Berserker Darkling who has its own voice and personality. So really it's up to the player to kind of, see what Darklings they like the best, to utilize them. And if you just sit there and watch them, you can sit there and watch them all day and just listen to them talk and, do their own thing. So we really wanted to capture that same kind of aspect from the comic, and I think we did a really good job, and everybody's really proud of what came out. Single player is obviously the meat and potatoes of the game. It's what we spend most of the time on. There's about 5 chapters spanning the whole single player, so it's a relatively long game. We're looking to about 15 plus hours maybe for the gameplay, depending on what the user wants to do as well. You know, there's plenty for them to explore. And then as far as multiplayer goes, which I think is a big component of what we've also done, is 1 to 8 players online for both PS3 and Xbox 360. And the catch with the multiplayer is we wanted the player to be able to play as the Darklings. So you really have this cool contrast of, you know, playing as a mobster who's kind of a little slower paced, maybe a little more hit points, you know, able to wield bigger weapons. But you could shapeshift real time into a Darkling, and all of a sudden you're this fast little demon that could crawl on ceilings and walls and pounce 50 feet in the air, but you're a little bit weaker, so there's a give and take there. But I'm so proud to be able to work with Top Cow and Starbreeze, and we did a great job on this game. I think everybody's really going to enjoy playing it, and I can't wait till it gets out and I hear the fan reaction from it. So hopefully that'll happen in early June.